So I'm back in the shop with Barry Mussell, and I've been having a great conversation on a wide-ranging set of topics related to our lives as carpenters, right? And I'll tell you, I have never worked with or had a chance to talk to somebody as well-versed in framing generally and roof cutting specifically as this guy. And part of the evidence for that, besides the photographs that he's got and the pictures of the things that he's built, is the fact that he wrote this book, Roof Framer's Bible. And there are other references for cutting a roof, but I don't think there are any as comprehensive as this one. I'm dazzled at how much detail you included in this and how well you must have done in math in high school. Okay. By the way, he graduated valedictorian at 16 years old, which is qualification enough for writing a math book for a carpenter. But I got some questions for you that might be of general interest to people, and I want you to go just as far into this as you think is useful for folks.
All right.
So if there's a young carpenter watching here that he thinks he understands how to use a square or use a book or his speed square, and he thinks he's ready to cut a roof, and he knows he's got to go to work next week and do it, and he's losing a little sleep. When he walks up to the site and rolls out the plans, what should be the first moves that he makes before he slaps the saw into the wood?
Well, you got to take inventory of the details, verify the pitch. Are there irregular pitches? Are they all the same pitch all the way around? If you're dealing with a hip roof, check out all the dimensional lumber sizes, all these rafter spans. They have to be correct.
Make sure the material's on the job.
You're not going to make sure the material's on the job, but also make sure you're cutting the right material in the right place. Nothing will get you fired quicker than cutting up a whole lot of lumber wrong.
Man. Oh, man.
So,
my habit was always start with the longest boards first.
Yeah.
But go ahead. What else should you be thinking of? Verify the material, verify the lengths and the dimension matches plans.
Yeah, your plan-related issues, where personally I would always start. Make sure you're thoroughly familiar with what it's shown in the plan and specification and the engineered drawings and everything.
Don't start until you're thoroughly familiar.
No, you don't start to go on a trip until you know where you're going.
That's right.
You've got to get that plan. It's your roadmap, and you've got to thoroughly digest that plan and make sure you know and you're familiar with where you're going. Then you've got to verify if you're, I didn't work in that world of roof stackers where I didn't frame the walls, but if you're doing that, certainly you've got to verify the dimensionally accuracy of what you're working with.
Tape it. Tape the spans. Check to see that if they plumbed and lined it.
Is it plumbed and lined? Is it square? Mm-hmm. Is it level? Mm-hmm. All that comes into play. It's massively. See, the Roof Framer's Bible is all done mathematically.
Right.
See, a lot of people get out there and they'll set some commons and they'll pull some strings and they're cutting at each individual time. Of course, that's very time consuming.
Right.
But math does not lie. You can calculate all of that precisely, exactly.
And cut it all on the ground.
But if your house is crooked and out of dimension, nothing's going to fit.
Then you cut it on the ground and it doesn't fit.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So in my opinion, it's way better to do it mathematically, but you have to be accurate. Yeah. You have to be accurate.
Like a 1/16 of an inch counts.
In framing, maybe an eighth. But,
okay. All right. Did you hear that? If you can do it to an eighth, you may be okay. But if you shoot for a 1/16, you're never going to miss by more than an eighth. Is that a fair way to say it?
That's a fair way to say it.
Okay. All right. So what else? You're on the job. You've verified dimension. You verified plumb. You verified straight. You verified level. You verified the material. What's your next move?
You get a strategy of how you're going to go about stacking the roof. And generally, that's the main body of the house.
The big chunks.
The big chunks. And then you fill the other ones in later. Now, sometimes if you've got overframing or various things, you got vaulted ceilings, sometimes you'll frame those smaller appendages first, you're framing on top of them. So a lot of times that's determined by the plans, but sometimes it's under the purview of the framer to decide how he's going to approach the job. The more complicated the house, of course, the more variables you're going to have in doing that.
Okay, so let's say it's a choppy roof. They take the Roof Framer's Bible or whatever it is they're using to get their lengths. Mm-hmm. Cut the whole thing?
I always did.
Cut the whole thing. On the ground, stack it. You got a magic marker, a Sharpie, you label it carefully. Mm-hmm. You make sure the stacks are coherent.
I say that. My preference to do that. Obviously, the first rule is keep your crew running.
Keep your crew
Now,
working.
If you weren't proactive enough to get started early enough to have everything cut, then you cut what they needed,
Yeah.
and you try to play catch up.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, generally speaking, my younger brother had worked with me, and so I would drop back, you know, complicated stairs or something. I would drop back, work on those while he ran the crew on the roof systems. Once they hit ceiling joists, he was running the crews, setting ceiling joists, and I'd drop back and start cutting rafters. So
Yeah.
by the time they finished ceiling joists, we had everything cut.
Yeah.
But sometimes not. Sometimes I wasn't fast enough. So, you know, you give them what they need.
Yeah, keep them working.
Yeah.
So that drops right into my next question. And this is impossible to answer. It's a case-by-case thing. But in general, how do you think about what tasks can you safely give to a helper? And how much help does a roof cutter need?
Well, you don't do anybody any favors by cutting them loose before they're ready.
Boy.
And, you know, it's such an individualized basis. You don't ask them to swim a marathon in their first time in the pool.
Yeah.
You know, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
you just got to bring them on slowly until they. And in complicated roofs, you know, I mean, you let them do the simple stuff.
Yeah.
You step back and let them do it.
Yeah.
But I'll be frank about it. The world that we were in, the monetary constraints, we did it the fastest way possible.
The fastest way.
Which was usually me cutting the roofs.
Yeah. Yep. You're never waiting on that. That's the beauty of one man working by himself. He's never waiting on anybody. Mm-hmm. Because even two good hands, there's some amount of time where you're waiting for that guy to hand you something, you know, or waiting for him to call a measurement.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, that's a great answer. You're not doing him any favors if you give him something he can't deal with. And you're really not giving him any favors if you never teach him to do something in addition to what he's already learned. Mm-hmm. Good answer.
In stages.
In stages.
Walk before you run.
Walk before you run. Worm drives or sidewinders?
Never used a worm drive.
Never. Would you like to today?
Oh, I've picked them up.
Yeah,
but,
I know. They're heavy.
They are heavy.
Yeah.
As a guy that was cutting these very cut up roofs,
Yeah.
that sidewinder wear me out. I can't imagine that worm drive.
Yeah. Double cutting hips at the peaks and jacks at the peaks. And we'll get a picture in here to represent that. And I pointed that out in the spec house, you know, the utility of double cutting if you need to, if somebody else is assembling your components, you know, there's one less thing for them to keep track of left and right. Did you ever do that, or was everything hard left, hard right, and that's it?
On the jacks, everything was either left or right. I didn't do that. Now hips, you know, the top end of the hip, I'm gonna double cheek cut it.
Yeah.
And if you are changing layout when you cross the end of the ridge, so that you have matched sets of jacks, of course, if you're doing that, you're always going to have a common right at the end of the ridge.
At the end of the ridge
So
where
it's
everything comes in.
So the hip will get a double cheek cut.
There you go.
Now, if you're feeling charitable to the guy sheathing the roof, and you're going to start on the end of the ridge here, and then let that one layout carry all the way across the other end of the ridge, then you're not going to have a common right on the end of the ridge, and so you would just have a single cut against the ridge on the top end of the hip rafter.
Okay.
But generally, we put commons at the end of the ridge. We'd have matched sets of jacks. And the
marching
top
down.
ends of the hips would always be double cheek cut.
Yeah. And it is so handsome to have those cheeks laying up nice and tight against that hip or down against it. It just looks so good.
There's nothing more beautiful than
Yeah, it is
open framing
beautiful.
for a complicated roof.
Yeah.
The trouble is we didn't have drones.
Yeah.
All the cool roofs we built, we didn't get good pictures of them.
Yeah, there was, I'm sure. I really only built one complicated roof, and it was 2 fascia board hangers. They would get $1 a foot to hang fascia board on single story, $2 a foot to hang fascia board on 2-story houses. The Payan brothers, Chris and, sorry, I can't remember his name. And they took a job to frame a house. And it was steep and it was choppy. It wasn't as choppy as some of the pictures of the stuff I've seen of yours, but it was choppy. I don't know, it doesn't matter how choppy. But Chris called me up and he said, yeah, I don't think we can do this. You want to come do this? I said, yeah. And I got over there and I got a chance to cut on the ground and put it up, and I could right then see that I've needed about a year as an understudy to Richard Lucero or somebody like that, and then I would have loved doing that. It's It's a fulfilling thing, isn't it? Figuring that out and cutting them.
Yeah.
And cataloging the work and using the cut on the left to mark the cut on the right underneath and all of that.
Yep.
Let me digress from our list of questions here. Tell me your thoughts about Larry Haun. Had you ever run into Larry Haun's work when you were in the field or not?
He was in California, I was in Georgia, I never saw him.
It was different worlds.
It was a different world. But the year after I wrote my book, editor at Fine Homebuilding contacted me
Really?
and said, we'd like to do a review of your book. Would you mind sending a copy to Larry Haun? So I said, well, of course, be glad to. So having been familiar with Larry, you know, I put together a little note, and I sent him some planned copies of some of the kind of weird, complicated stuff we were doing. I sent him a copy of the book. And he sent me back a really kind letter.
Nice.
I can't put my hand on it. I was going to bring it and show it to you.
If you ever find that, send me a copy.
And basically, he was a very humble guy.
Yeah.
And he said, man, I am glad I didn't have to frame these houses. But he gave me a real nice book review that was published in Fine Homebuilding. So I never had the pleasure of having met him.
Do you have a copy of that review?
I do. I brought it to you.
Good. I'd like to. The people would be interested in reading that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, fine. That's awesome. You may have known that Larry ended up retiring and moving to Coos Bay.
Coos Bay, right?
Which is just south of Reedsport, where you turned off coming in here.
Right.
And I wish I would have known that. He was a generation ahead of us, right? He was older.
Yeah.
Kind of a pioneer, or at least he adopted pioneering techniques.
Mm-hmm. And Will Holliday knew him. They were associated in those trade shows, and you know, with either Journal Light Construction or Fine Homebuilding, they ran in that same circle. They're both California guys. So they knew each other. Yeah.
So let's talk about Will Holliday because here's another book that you're going to want to know about. This by Will Holliday, right? Mm-hmm. A friend. Barry and Will know each other, and Barry wants you to know that this is another very valuable reference for a young carpenter if you're interested in really wrapping your head around a lot of the details that might take you decades to stumble onto on your own. Is that a fair way to describe that?
Absolutely.
Tell us about this book and about this man.
Well, Will Holliday is a California framer. He worked in the tracks. It's all about production. He's in that piecework.
Yep.
In fact, he doesn't refer to himself as a framer. East Coast, I'm a framer or a roof framer. He's a roof cutter.
Yep.
We don't use that term back east, but he was a roof cutter. And, he's pushing 70, I guess, maybe 71. I'm not sure exact age, but at heart, he's still a roof cutter.
He's still a roof cutter.
And if he had his health, there's nothing he'd rather do than be cutting roofs.
Yeah.
And so
But he used a worm drive.
Yes, he did. He did. So he did that, but then he went into big custom homes all up and down the coast. He ended up, because of his association with JLC, he ended up doing some stuff up in the Northeast. Mm-hmm. And, Will did everything.
He did everything.
He was a pilot. He did river rafting stuff. My. He did all kinds of stuff. He lived the life out there. But what he did do, much better than I did, is all through the years of doing all that stuff, he kept great pictures.
Oh.
So this book is loaded with all kinds of pictures, and he breaks it down in so many different ways. It's just really a great compilation of stuff for construction.
Boy, it is, isn't it? It is. I wish I would have had this when I was actually a carpenter and not a virtual carpenter. So your books complement each other.
They do.
His is a text on how things are done. This is a reference book on the numbers that you need to know when you run into a problem.
Roof Framer's Bible is intended to be more of a tool than a book. It's all predicated on being a pocket-sized reference. And there's just not space in that small format to be a more full-bodied review of things like is in Will's book.
That isn't what you were thinking of. Your intended impact on carpenters was that they would have a reference, a ready reference, to boom, here's the number that I need.
Yeah, I mean, you may be familiar with this book, I don't know.
Full-length roof framer?
This was first published in 1917. Okay. And again, you got to understand this was before the age of handheld calculators. Sure. And so somebody that's going to cut a roof, they could step it off with a framing square. They could use the tables off of framing square. But people who are production cutters, more often than not, used a full-length roof framer. And for decades, most of your production carpenters would have one of these in their bib overalls.
Right.
And that was the way. My dad bought one of these, I think about 1949.
No kidding.
So when I started framing, I used his copy.
No kidding.
And so I was framing initially these more standard hip roofs and gable roofs and stuff, so it wasn't a big deal. But when I got into that one contractor that was doing all these bastard hips,
Yes.
and of course it's too complicated to go all the details, but
Sure.
it's a complete game changer. And so when I came to write that book, the biggest difference, I wanted it to be comprehensive. That's why it's called Roof Framer's Bible. So it's got all the standard pitches that were in the full-length roof framer, but it's got 68 different combinations of the dual pitch or regular pitch bastard roof.
68 different possible combinations of different pitches running into each other in different instances.
Yeah, and then, you know, polygon roofs, octagon, hexagon, and so forth. Try to put anything and everything a framer would need.
Yeah.
But the challenge is to get all that information in there and still make it portable and accessible to somebody that's, you know, in the field working.
Yeah.
And so Will's book has the advantage of a larger format that he's able to go into much more detail about the how of it.
So these books work well together as a set.
Absolutely.
Well, when you talk to Will next time, just tell him how impressed we are around here at how these books work together and at the photographs of the things that he's done and the way that he incorporated those into his book. It's an interesting thing to look at.
Yeah, JLC called him a legend. He says, no, I'm just an old broken down carpenter.
Good for him.
But he's a legend.
Yeah.
Larry Haun, Will Holiday,
He's
are
in pot.
icons of the industry.
Now, I never served an apprenticeship. I just took the math and the physics that I learned in high school in the first 2 terms of college, and I went to work. But let me just tell you young guys how deeply I wish that I could have either worked with Will Holiday or worn out a copy of this fantastic, fantastic text that encompasses every single thing that you're going to wish you knew when you're finally working as a framer. Larry Haun's book, The Very Efficient Carpenter, is also terrific. It's a great place to start. But if you know that you want to be the best at your craft, if you know that you want to be the top hand on every job you ever walk into, then you've got to learn what's inside this little blue book. Thank you for watching Essential Craftsman, and keep up the good work.